Hi, my name is Marcin Żebrowski and this is my podcast about cities, Urbcast. Welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast. And before I introduce you the guest and the office that I will talk about, I wanted to just explain something. I don't want to make any excuse, but last time there wasn't the new episode in English, and that was simply because I've been working on something new, and I'm very happy that I can share my work and share my newest talk with Jeanette Frisk from Archilab office. But before I go into that, I just need to say that there will be this new series called Copenhagen Architecture Offices Series, where I will present a couple of offices, where I will present architects and designers from Copenhagen-based architecture offices. And I just need to emphasize that this is my private and personal choice. It's not a cooperation. It's just my personal kind of idea, my personal selection of offices that I really like and that I admire the work of. I just thought that it will be very interesting for you, my listeners, as well. I know that there are people listening to me from all over the world. And I'm also aware that Copenhagen might have this association of being the design, the Scandinavian, at least, design and architecture capital. So I just wanted to show you the profiles of the companies that are based in here, to show you their work, their approach, and how different architects develop their careers. I need to say that I'm really, really happy that Jeanette Frisk from Archilab agreed to be the first one. And we talked about her approach to design, which is very particular because Archilab is focused on working with people, on citizen involvement. And I was very, very curious, how did it start? And I think that it is extremely interesting that Jeanette shared her doubts back from when she was studying architecture, and she was looking for the direction for her career, for how to develop her skills as an architect and how to basically make the change in our urban environment. I will try to also show that architecture is not only this end product in the form of a building or a space that people admire and take many photos of, but it is also hard work, a lot of doubts, a lot of looking for the direction for both your career and your office. I'm very happy to present you the newest talk with Jeanette Frisk. So welcome. Copenhagen Architecture Offices Series is my private and personal choice of architecture companies based in Denmark and especially in Copenhagen. In the future episodes, I will present you companies and architecture offices working here in Copenhagen, and I will show the different approaches of those companies. I just need to emphasize that this is my private and personal choice. So I just kind of wanted to show you how I see architecture market and how I see Copenhagen. So yeah, I think we can start. Jeanette, thank you very much for being part of my podcast. Welcome to Urbcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy for the invite. It's always nice to share your passion and your visions for what you do. So thank you.
I hope that people, architects in Copenhagen, know you here. Young architects, students, they know Archilab. But yeah, still, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jeanette Frisk. I'm an architect. I'm educated from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts from Copenhagen. Some years ago. I think it's 15, 16 years ago or something like that. And I remember already then feeling somewhat uneasy within the profession, still loving it and hating it at the same time. And that sort of stuck with me for a long time until I think I got experience enough in the profession, working, and actually were able to understand the sort of the questions or the uneasiness I had about being and working as an architect. And I think it's only a few years ago that I was actually able to sort of express my concerns or what was actually bothering me when I was studying. And it was mainly the thing about we were we were doing our own projects. I was the way I was taught was with one architect or one professor sitting at my desk once a week, guiding me in terms of a design that I was only developing myself, with no one else, no understanding of the users or the people, or with the only focus of shape and function and aesthetics. And we continued doing that for 5 years, and then I graduated. And I remember there must be something more. There's something I'm missing, right? Did I do anything wrong? Or and then I think I got a sort of a new education when I started working as a professional architect, doing a lot of competitions and sort of work for developers, and started asking myself, or I would say, start to adjust my moral and professional compass in a way, right? I remember these meetings with developers where their only focus was, can you squeeze in another room so we can actually, and downsize the square meters, downsize the apartment so we can, add another apartment and earn more, right? So profit. And that was the only focus. So slowly over the years, from being at school, being educated and also working, I just started being very critical about being an architect and the position of the architect in the processes and in society in general. Yeah, so that was a very long introduction to me, but that is also what shapes me and what I do today. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that this is a common struggle for people studying in architecture, but I guess not only. So I think that this is very interesting to hear how you developed and this compass that you mentioned, this professional compass. I think that this is something that we all need to kind of look for and adjust in our early years of the career. But you said something about this love and hate relationship. Can you develop this thought? Because you might have this feeling sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong, that you spend so many hours in front of the computer and you wonder if you even make a difference, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, basically, why I chose to be an architect was, I think, was the sort of the balance. At least that's how I thought it was. The balance between theory and praxis, the balance between aesthetics and moral, or not moral, but how do you say, ethics. And then, of course, the notion that as an architect, you actually help shape people's everyday life because you shape their physical surroundings. And with that in mind, the way we are taught to be architects, or at least the culture at the architecture school when I was studying, was just so off. It was not comparing with the idea that I had and the amount of responsibility that I knew that you actually have as an architect. So the love and hate is the notion that we have a great responsibility and we can actually have the possibility to affect a lot of people's lives and everyday life. And we have to take that very seriously. And we don't do that if we only focus on aesthetics and shape. And I know that there is a culture shift in our profession right now. And it comes from different sides, I think, both from politic ambition, from people pushing from the bottoms up. There's a lot of movements in the world today that help this more democratic focus, this more people-focused approach to developing our cities, right? But when that's it, I think we have a long way to go, because I think we are also facing a huge democratic problem in just how, for instance, the Copenhagen Harbor is developed these days with a lot of opposition happening from the bottoms up, a lot of resistance towards developing some of these nature areas and untouched areas in Copenhagen, and how, it's just in a very, how do you say, hard way pushed from the top. It is a democratic problem, and that's what we are trying to change through this very people-focused approach.
Forgive me my next question, because I think that you might hear it a lot while you are giving some presentations and speeches. But when was the moment that you kind of realized that citizen involvement and working with people and kind of showing what architecture can offer to them in a way? When did it start? Like, when did you feel that that's it and this is how you want to continue with your work as an architect?
That's a good question. When you ask the question, I think I immediately remember some of our early projects when we started 6, 7, maybe it's even more, 8 years ago. I lost track of time because what we did at that time, we're sort of a mix between artists, activists, and architects, right? In the sense that when we started, we knew that there was something we wanted to explore. We wanted to experiment with the role and the position of the architect. The projects weren't really there, so we had to we had to invent our own projects, and so we made some fund applications for the Danish Art Foundation, wanting to experiment with how to communicate and activate children within the process of developing architecture, or within the conversation of our, the architecture conversation, the language that we are using. And they bought into that completely. So for some years, we were sort of funded to do these different school projects. And I remember some of the earlier projects where we were standing there in a classroom teaching kids to do analysis, urban space analysis, or do people counting, or just to, notice their surroundings walking around in the city. And I remember the impact it had on their, a kind of a resistance in the beginning. Why should we even care about where I live and the streets I walk in or bike in and stuff like that? But when we were sort of unfolding the architectural process and the language, I think they sort of realized that it was actually a very important part of their life. And then we developed some approaches and some methods to actually engage them within real life projects. So, then they got the feeling of, or the experience of actually being part of changing their surroundings. And I remember those early projects as a sort of a game changer for me, saying, okay, it is very important, this idea that we have, that we all need to be much better at noticing our surroundings and expressing and having the language of actually talking about our physical surroundings. So I guess that is what helped shape Archilab. And since then, we've also had an extensive approach towards young people, involving young people as a sort of a marginalized group in our society that is not asked about their local area or their community, or are not invited into taking part in the conversation.
And I think that this is not only in Denmark. I think it's all over the world. It's in many other European countries as well. And I will just quickly mention the project I was a part of in Warsaw. We did this urban prototyping project that we just closed off the street for cars for one weekend, and we just prototyped the space with the citizens. And I need to say that Archilab's work was one of the role models for us, or for me, because it kind of showed us that it is possible to involve people and create those projects with them, and really emphasize this part before the physical part of the project, which all the workshops and conversation with the future users. I assume that you learned by doing all those projects, and that's why I would like to go to the tools that you use. Can you just tell us now, first, before pandemic, which tools did you use? I know it might be a bit different right now, but let's start with the tools you've been using for years.
Yes, and it's a very sort of big part of it's almost like products we have on the shelf, these tools. We've talked to some clients that consider them as a sort of that we are sort of boutique kind of company where we have these specialized tools that we can sort of take from the shelves and implement in different processes. And it's maybe not far from the truth, but how it originated was that, again, one of these school projects we were doing with kids. We were at a stage we knew that we had to, the thing about going out and asking people, what do you want for your local area? You will just get the answers saying, we want a football court. And then you say, but you have one already. Oh, yeah, but then we want another one. You need to give lay people access to also understanding the process of working as an architect. So I'm not saying we are educating them to be architects, but we have to give them a little bit of, language and methods to actually apply to this conversation, right? So at a point we also knew to motivate, for instance, young people, we needed to understand how to do that. And it was not just with Post-it notes. I mean, we needed to explore some kind of innovative co-design processes. So we were leaning up against the IDEO, the design thinking process. Sorry. Yeah, the design thinking process is a cornerstone of what we do. And I couldn't remember the name. Design thinking process, the sort of the iterative way of starting with the analysis and ending up with some kind of solution to the problems you identify, right? So we came up with the idea of creating a board game that would in itself, raise awareness, because it is so unfamiliar to put a board game on a table when you are doing a project about your local square, right? Or a larger area. So because we were implementing it in some kind of teaching process or learning process with kids, it was developed with the sort of design thinking methods and gamification in mind, right? How can you stimulate a conversation? How can you make it playful and stuff like that? So basically what it is, it's a board with a map of relevance at the center, and then it's a set of questions sort of set around the edge of that board. And it takes you through everything like, well, hello, and read the rules of the game. It's in the box, right? Say hello to each other. And in that way, stimulate a conversation that slowly moves you from your own self and out into a sort of more, community awareness. There's a lot of interesting theories written about this. And it's not that we were aware of them in the beginning. I've become aware of them afterwards because I've studied some of the design thinking methods and theories. But so basically what it does is that through this process that can take everything from an hour to 8 hours, depending on the scope and the client and the task and everything else, we take people through sort of a guided analysis of their area, identifying potentials and issues, turning them into solutions, and at the end, maybe even ending up with some kind of design. And now we've used it for so many years now. It's as an essential sort of tool in every kind of our processes. And we even had clients saying, we want you because we want your game. I have an example of a project we did in France, in Marseille, in the early stages when we were using the game, where the client was, shaking their head saying, what are we going to play a game? And I, and implemented that kind of approach in France. It's also very radical. But they agreed. And at the end, they were like, let's play more Akinopoly. That's the name of the game, right? And we're like, we only use it in the beginning of a process. Then we have to move into other types of tools and processes, right? So what it gives us as architects is it gives us a lot of knowledge about people's areas. We get actually what we say, the low-hanging fruits of already sort of identified issues. We also get ideas for solutions. But what we also get, and what is part of our sort of main product when we talk about what we do, is actually we start creating community. Because this is a conversation that brings people closer to each other and gives people an understanding of, let me come up with an example. When they start drawing their different routes on a map and they start identifying places that they like or that they don't like, you move away from your sort of idea saying, this is my problem, and so that's the more relevant one. And when you start having other problems on the map, other people's issues, you start moving away from yourself and you start creating empathy towards other people's situations. So there's also a big sort of layer of psychology and group dynamics that is built into this approach or this tool. And then you asked about pandemic, what did we do? So when we were living, what we do is that we bring people together, and we weren't able to do that. We had to take it into the virtual world, right? So luckily we found some platforms that was really working well, where we could apply the game into a virtual platform and still be able to bring people together. It does not, I would say, it's not a one-to-one solution. It's still the best solution to sit people together with 1.5 meters distance and looking in each other's eyes and reading each other's faces and stuff like that, having the conversation that way. But it did help us to still be able to do what we do, even though we're not allowed to bring people together. So that's one of our tools, Archinopoly.
Yeah, you said quite a bit about the first tool, about the Archinopoly. I like this idea of gamification of design of architecture. But when I was listening to this, I was thinking about one challenge that might appear, because how can you make sure that there will be something feasible coming out of the game? Because like if you put this board game in front of the people, in front of the community at some meeting, they might just think, okay, I mean, it's not real. We'll play some games, we'll just talk and that's it, right? So how can you kind of maybe not ensure, but how can you try to have this feasible outcome from such a thing as a game, and how to kind of show this mentality or kind of, talk to people and explain to them that this, what is called a game, it might have some result in the future on their physical space.
It's a very good question, and I think it is something that everyone that works with people have to be very aware of. And it's not. I mean, let's say we have a project where we only have a few sessions of sort of workshop with Archinopoly, and then we get some data, and then we develop either a master plan or an urban space or whatever the product is. We would always have to make sure that the citizens we're working with have know exactly what they will be able to impact. What is the result and the outcome of this process? It can be a mix between making sure that they know what the budget is, what the political decisions, the line of that being, so having a very, very transparent process is always what we recommend for our clients, because that is a thing that will block a good process, right? But since the board game often is just one method or one tool in a line of a lot of different approaches in a process, we constantly make sure when we have these sort of built-in feedback loops with the community. So starting off having a very sort of broad approach, saying this is now just a matter of understanding your community, understanding your town or your area. We will not start drawing at all. We will exhibit at the end, we'll exhibit all your identified problems and possible solutions. Then we often give people a chance to either vote or directly. We actually have some projects where we've given people stickers so they can sort of vote for their favorite solutions or favorite problem that has to be solved. And then at a stage, we start concluding something. We start putting pen on paper and make some kind of solution. But then before we finish, we have to have a couple of these sort of feedback loops again, making sure that everyone feels that they are part of the design and decision making. Because often what happens when you do citizen involvement on a sort of more normal level, you start asking people either through surveys or urban walks or something like that. You gather or workshops, and you gather a list of wishes or problems. And then you give it to the architects. They go behind these closed doors into their machine room and they develop a solution. And often people cannot recognize the product because they have not sort of been part of the progression of the project. So you have actually a bigger success rate if you not constantly, but at least in a certain frequency, make sure that you communicate back what is happening and what are the decisions that is being made. Also, if there are some decisions where you say, this is not for you to decide, this is someone else that's deciding this. As long as you know, as long as you communicate it clearly, the process, then in most cases, you have people walking along.
And I can imagine that when you just start asking questions while you work with a community, you can get huge variety of them, and you can also hear that people are sometimes angry. Like when you start asking about some problems, some challenges, it's like, a whole sea of problems in there. I think that this is another challenge. Once you start working with people and you say, okay, what would you like to have in your community or in your square or in your like close neighborhood? When you ask such a question, like, okay, you can imagine everything right now and you play the game, and people can come up with such a huge amount of ideas. Like, I would like to have a park. I would like to have a new basketball field. I would like to have something else. And I mean, those things that people need, it's hardly possible to build them sometimes because, for example, they are not meeting the budget. And you mentioned that this is important part that you kind of showed what the budget is at the beginning. But sometimes how can you kind of drive this process in a way that people know that they can't just, they can't just wish for like everything they want, but they rather need to stick to some kind of compromise and dialogue with architects, with other citizens, with the municipality and other stakeholders as well.
And you're so right. I mean, it's. I think I noticed two things in your question. First off, there is angry people you mentioned. Yeah. What will happen with angry people? We always have angry people. And then there is how do we make sure that when we have this pile of ideas that people are not just sticking with their own one, or how can we actually make sure that they understand we cannot build everything, right? The budget is only, there has a limits, right? Mm. I think I'll start with the angry. I mean, when you have angry people, it's often because you have not invited them in from the beginning. It's often because there are already some decisions that have been made. Or, when you have imagine now a big gym hall in the local school. People are gathered on a Wednesday night at 8. There is coffee and there is cake, and the mayor is there and the architect team is there, and they're presenting this glossy future vision for the city of whatever, with all these beautiful renderings and everything. Everything is decided. Everything is very finished. The renderings are very detailed, and you can start arguing about the color of surfaces or the materiality or whatever, right? Because it's so specific. It has not been opened up for dialogue beforehand. It is decided. So the only thing people can do is be angry and how do you say, resist and complain, because there is no room for anything else. It is finished. So why are they there, right? Only to inform. This is how it's going to be. So basically, if you want to avoid angry people, then open up the dialogue even earlier. We have a project example of in Odsherred municipality in northern part of Zealand, where the municipality said, we're going to do a process. We were the consultants. We don't know what is going to be built where. But you as a client, you as a consultant, you have to end up with the design and the implementation of 2 new urban spaces in Esnes. So that was the premise, and that was very bold, right? That was very brave of a municipality saying, so start up mapping the local community. And then for a year, we sort of narrowed down to, okay, out of 9 places, we went down to 4, we went down to 2, and everyone had been part of deciding. And of course, someone was pointing in another direction, but they could also understand budget-wise, and because there was more people voting for something else, they were sort of joining around that problem. But if you still have conflicts, or if you still have angry people, then maybe not look at, try to avoid conflicts, try to see them as a sort of knowledge, a source of knowledge, and actually accepting that you cannot make everyone happy. That's not the point. We cannot build consensus where you have 100% backup, right? There will be people disagreeing, and it's not a bad. It's sometimes actually a source of understanding where there are different pressure points you need to be aware of, right? Like traffic, the car is a constant source of conflict in smaller towns, right? We need them, or we want something else. We need more bike paths, no, we need more parking lots, that kind of, and you have to accept it's there, and then you have to sort of just lower your shoulders and say, but okay, we've identified an issue. How do we treat it? Talk with the client, talk with the community again. And at the end, people, if they're taken by the hand throughout the whole process, you will somehow get a general or the majority to back up because they feel ownership. They've been part of creating whatever is the result of a process, right? And in terms of making sure that people understand that, it's not a wish list they're making and that it's not everything we can build, we often pile group the ideas into themes or categories because there are some things you can actually combine in a design. That's where we as architects are very important. We are educated to, or we have the sort of professional understanding of actually putting all these ideas together and making them into design solutions that are both aesthetically beautiful and work in a multifunctional way. And in that way, you actually, you are able to meet more people by combining ideas, but also make them understand by visualizing in themes and in categories that their ideas could actually, align. Yeah, I know I talk a lot.
But it's a very complex case. And when you talked about the renderings at the beginning and visualizations, I just think that this is something I've learned some time ago, that the more like ready and finished the image of some vision for a place looks, the more comments, the more backlash you would get, the more people would just point out the elements that might be not the most important ones, like the material and so on. And yet I think that this is the good direction to kind of involve people by showing them that the process is long process, right? Design process is a very long process, and that you need to have those several stages where the image or the rendering comes almost as last one, right? After the vision is agreed with all the parties involved. Here I wanted to ask about the Archilab and about branding, because your website looks very playful. It's almost like, a sandbox. And you also mentioned that you heard that Archilab is almost as this shop with the tools, and you can just come in and you can just choose the tool. And was it also made on purpose so that you kind of simplified the way you communicate? So the graphics, the images you present to your projects, they are like very colorful, catchy, but also easy to understand, both for I guess architects and for kids, for other people. Was that intentional in a way?
Yes, I think at a point we were very aware of how we were sort of graphically communicating or the style we were using to communicate ourselves. And I think also at a point we were mainly maybe communicating to kids and young people. So that playful sort of way of portraying ourselves was sort of natural. But communication is a very, very important part of what we do. And for us, I mean, one thing is branding, one thing is how we portray ourselves on the website or on social media. We are constantly aware that we are talking to lay people, but we're not supposed to talk down to people. We have to sort of, consider our own sort of professional language and making sure that we are not talking to ourselves, so talking to other architects, that we talk to everyone, right? And that is also visual. That's how we catch people's attentions. That's why Instagram and these kind of social medias are so, popular or in everyone's sort of app store, right? Or on the iPhone, because that's how the world is going today. We are just more visual, right? So I think you're right. It's a funny analysis, or a good analysis maybe of our website. Is a sort of a playful sandbox. Anything can happen, and if that's what you see, then I think we're doing it right. We do have sometimes some issues where, for instance, in Australia we have a lot of projects, but it's mainly with sort of high level stakeholders. It's not on the citizen level yet. So very professional people, very sort of high-level stakeholder, politicians and decision makers and stuff. And in those cases, we do have to sort of not do the hand-drawn kind of graphics. We sort of alter it. We adapt it, of course, to the people we are working with. So no one sort of gets irritated, And that, I think, is very important part of our work, that we have to adapt to our different audience and to the different situations.
I'm happy that I analyzed your website in a kind of right way. And still, there's this one theme that I wanted to discuss, and you mentioned it partly already. It's the work under the pandemic. And I, of course, don't want to say that I don't want to ask this very basic question that, okay, how it influenced your type of work, because, of course, like we all work from home and so on. And like there were companies that were lucky enough to have the laptops, right? So the transition was kind of easy. Some companies had the more like stationary tools, so it was harder, of course. But I'm asking this question because you are like this special type of architecture office, and I hear you based on work with people, you based on the citizen involvement. So how did it influence you? I think that this question in your case and in case of your work is very, very valid.
I mean, we were also in the beginning of the lockdown a year ago, looking at each other saying, how do we manage here? I mean, we thrive and we work for actually bringing people together physically, and are very that's how we articulate our work, and how, people have to look at each other, and, all that, psychology that's behind that kind of approach also. But luckily for us, actually before that, we had already started digitizing our game. So we were already in the mindset of actually transforming that into a virtual digital world. And then I think what happened to our advantage was that everyone didn't know what to do, no matter how they were working. So these platforms were really coming up all around. So we quickly actually found some platforms, creative platforms, that we could adapt our board game or in our tools to even faster than our own digital solutions also. So we've actually hosted a lot of large workshops over the pandemic. I think I've hosted a couple where we've been almost 100 people. So of course it's Zoom or Teams or whatever. You gather people there and you have some kind of initial presentation or whatever. And then we always use the breakout rooms, because that's also our approach in the physical world. We never do those traditional hearings where you can raise your hand and ask questions where, in an audience of several hundred people, because then we know who will stand up and ask questions or pose. And that's the middle-aged white man. And that excludes everyone else from the dialogue. So we never do that anyway. We always place people together in small groups, a more safe environment where an actual conversation can happen, right? And we do that also in the virtual world. So basically, after the first couple of months being, we're fucked, kind of, we actually adapted. And that's also some of the response we've got from some of our clients that was praising, or how do you say, very happy about that we were able to adapt very quickly and actually making sure that the time plan we had laid out and our results and our goals for the process was actually reached anyway. And sometimes with an advantage, because we started realizing that when we had to do it digitally, either do questionnaires or do online exhibitions or do online workshops, people could participate from home. They could participate whenever they had the time. And that included then more women in the conversation. There is a structure, unfortunately, when we do these, or a culture, when we do these traditional hearings or workshops at night or late afternoon, the women don't come because they are the ones picking up, in most cases, the kids, or, staying at home, making dinner or whatever. We still are stuck in the last century with these kind of patterns. So it's the men that show up. But in this, virtual digital world that we had to adapt to, we actually got 50% men and women to participate. In some cases, more women than men. We got more young people into the conversation. So we actually, all of a sudden, we were aware that what we had been trying to do in the physical world, trying to have a more diverse group, making sure that the minorities in our society were also part of the conversation, actually happened when we did the virtual and the digital meetings or activities. Yeah. So that was a good thing, a very positive thing. So we are trying to constantly be aware of how we can balance now in the future the digital and the physical sort of activities and approach. And that's only a plus. So I think we've learned a lot.
Recently, we also published an article as our Urban 10 collective, design collective, and we have written this article about how to reach out the citizens during pandemic, and of course, like your work was one of the examples, because I think that you showed how to make this transition towards the digital worlds and towards the digital work. But I didn't know, I wasn't aware that it was so successful, that you engage different groups and the different types of people and people who would not be able to show up in the physical meeting, so to say. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of inspired by your work, that you, even though at first maybe you've been panicking, maybe not, but you've been like in this hard moment as everyone, and then like running around the office and like, oh no, what's gonna happen if our work basis on contact, on human interaction, which was kind of closed down for many months. Just to sum it up, in a way, I think that if some young architects are listening to us, I would like to come back one more time to the beginning of our talk, and that when you said that you've been looking for this part that you've been interested in architecture. I mean, this more social aspect. And here I just would like to ask one last question in our talk, like what would be like a very short recommendation from you to people who are starting up their careers in architecture and design right now?
In order to be able to still, to love what you do, because starting up your own business is tough work. I mean, there are so many uncertainties. So I think if you're doing that, you at least want to be passionate about what you're doing. So I would maybe on a more personal level sort of explore the trigger points, or where do we wonder what we are doing, because I think you'll have a lot of success, both personally and maybe also hopefully in getting business, getting projects, if you are very passionate about what you're doing, if you can sell the story, and if it's very convincing, and it's only very convincing if it sort of originates from a place of wonder, or a place of critics, wonder what we are doing and how we are doing stuff, right? And I think, but we have it's always very difficult when you start up to actually from the beginning know exactly your profile and what the issues you want to solve. Maybe not the last thing, but and I think you also have to accept that you will evolve, and that it's something, it takes time. It takes time to figure out if there's a market for what you're doing, and to figure out how to deal then how to communicate. What is the burning platform for you, and what is your approach to actually solve that, right? And I think what is funny, because when we started, people were, if you are involving people that much, then what about the architects? What is the role of the architect when you are sort of placing your own profession and giving it to the citizens? And I was constantly saying, but it's not how it is. I mean, I think when we move away and are not the center or the master of design, and when we sort of make that transition and move ourselves into sort of the edge and looking in, we have a very, very, important role of actually positioning ourselves as the change makers and the curator of that conversation, and then the translator into actual physical design. So I just become more aware of that position over the years when we've been working, how we are with the approaches that we're working with. So I know you started asking if I had any good advice. So get to know yourself and understand where you wonder about the world. And I think that's a good starting point. Passion. We need passion in the world, right? Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you for a book recommendation. I know that you have been that you published 2 books already, if I'm correct. So you can, of course, recommend those, but you can also recommend something else, maybe even not connected to architecture or design.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, of course, I want to recommend our own books, but I would also, of course, also recommend something else. But if you're curious about how to design cities with young people, or if you're curious about how we can use our urban spaces as learning spaces and get sort of an extra layer of activity into our cities, then that's the theme and the topic of those two books that we've published. But I want to recommend Leslie Kern's Feminist City, because I think for everyone, and also non-architects, especially non-architects, everyone, Leslie Kern is not an architect, she's a sociologist, wondering about how women can actually reclaim our urban spaces, right? Because with the sort of notion that it is designed by men and for men, we have to reclaim the city. And that's, I think I'm recommending it because it's a focus that we have sort of taken on over the last year. We've always have a feminist approach, because basically doing that is making sure that we make an inclusive process and that we invite everyone in. But I'm also very, I'm very focused right now on the idea that when we are not doing involvement, when we don't know what different groups in our society actually prefer in our urban spaces, and then we're only guessing, then we're assuming what a new active space that includes female or girls, would look like. And we're just assuming, and we don't have the knowledge. So we have to involve to actually understand how to design a more inclusive city. And I think the Feminist City by Leslie Kern really gives you, it's an eye-opener into every aspect of our public room, or public realm, how it actually excludes, especially women, but also then other groups in our society. So, it will be a basic book for everyone.
Thank you, Jeanette, for this recommendation. I will also add the links to the books in the description of this episode, so everyone interested can just reach out and read those books. And the last thing is, I just wanted to ask you, where can people find your work online, or not only online, maybe?
Yeah. You can always feel free to visit us here in Birkegade at Nørrebro in Copenhagen. We have a small sort of shop front office, but we are, of course, we have a webpage, www.archilab.dk. We are also on the different, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, trying to communicate what we do there. But you're also welcome, of course, to buy our books and get sort of a more extensive knowledge into what we do when we have this specialized focused on people. So look us up and visit us if you want to. It would be great.
Thank you very much, Jeanette, for our talk. Thank you also for inviting me here to your Archilab sandbox place with many stickers, with many photos on the walls, with many books around. So it looks very playful as your website and as well as your work. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you also. I'm looking forward to listening to some of your other podcasts and interviews, and of course also how this conversation will play out on and in the digital world. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the newest episode with Jeanette Frisk from Archilab, and I thought that you liked the first episode of Copenhagen Architecture Offices Series. My aim is to present to you this practical knowledge and practical approach from all of my guests and how they manage their companies, their architecture offices, what struggles do they have, how pandemic is influencing them as well, but also in general, how can those approaches vary? And I think that was a very good example of how you can basically approach citizens, the residents in the design process. And that's why I think that I like Archilab a lot, because they are approaching people in this like very practical way, and almost, as Jeanette said, giving the tools of architects to the residents. I think that this is extremely interesting way of doing architecture, by sharing this kind of insights from the architect's job to people so they can understand their correlation with the space better. I hope that you as well enjoyed this episode. And I also hope that you're looking forward to hearing more, as I do. So I just need to say that we will hear again each other in 2 weeks. So have a good day and see you.